All right, hi guys. Sorry I couldn't be there today. I'm in the building, so if you see me, you can say hi, but I will not be in class today. We're going to still do the 1.6 day number 1 notes because it shouldn't be too terrible for you. But instead of doing them on my screen as if I was physically there, I'm going to be here with you under the Elmo. So hello. The first vocab word that you have, if you don't have your Algebra 2 notes out, go ahead and get them out and open up to 1.6 day number 1. And to myself, whoever you are, you can feel free to pause this at any time if kids need a little extra time to write this stuff down. So feel free to pause the video if you need to. The first definition, relation. What I want you to write is that it's a pairing of input values with output values. So a pairing of input values with output values. One thing that I'm going to write here is that this can be represented a few different ways. So I want you to write can be, and this can be written as ordered pairs. You guys see ordered pairs a lot when we're graphing things. So ordered pairs, that looks like this, x comma y. All right, the x is considered your input, whereas the y value is considered your output. So it's still a pairing of input and output values. We just are used to seeing x and then y, but just know that x is the input, y is the output. It can also be represented as a mapping diagram. You'll see an example of a mapping diagram in a little bit here. And we could also represent it as a table. And there's even more, so I'm just going to put ... as well. So I'm going to give you an example of mapping diagrams real quick. For a mapping diagram, it might look like this. So you'll have on the left-hand side like a group of numbers that can be 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever number's listed in here. I'm just going to use 1, number 2 right there. And then I'm going to map that to some things on the right-hand side. Just so that you don't get used to always seeing numbers, I'm going to put A, B, and C in here. And I can map 2 to A, 2 to B, and 2 to C, and you map them with an arrow. All right, so that's what a mapping diagram would look like. It doesn't always go, a bunch of arrows from one thing. It could be, I could have 1, 2, and 3 in here, and I could map 1 to A, 2 to B, and 3 to C if I wanted to. Here's what you need to know from that, though. The things on the left-hand side, for me it's just the 2, those are my inputs. Whereas all the things on the right-hand side here that things are being mapped to, those are the outputs. And it's not going to say input on the left and output on the right. So you have to know that the inputs are on the left and that the outputs are on the right-hand side. The way that I would take this information and put it in ordered pairs, it would look like this. And you're used to seeing ordered pairs. Because 2 is an input, and our inputs get written first, I would do 2, comma, and then 2 is mapped to A. So 2, comma, A would be that first mapping as an ordered pair. And then I would write the next one. I also have 2, comma, because 2 is an input, mapped to B. So 2, comma, B. And then I also have 2 mapped to C as well. So I would write that as 2, comma, C. So I'm just taking the same information from my mapping diagram and showing you that this is the way that we would take that and write it as an ordered pair. So it's not new information. It's just a different way to write it. All right. The next vocab word that you have is domain. And domain is something that you guys have seen a ton all the way back to 8th grade. Probably even earlier than that. Domain, the definition of it, what I would like you to write is that this is the set of input values for a relation. All right, the set of input values for a relation. And it's really important that you underline input in this definition because domain is specifically the input. I'm going to also write with domain. I'm going to write AKA for also known as. Sometimes you'll hear me or other math teachers or other students, math books, whatever, refer to the domain as the X values. Okay, domain is typically the X values. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the list of independent variables. So it can be said either of those ways as well. So think domain goes with input, and it also goes with X values, and it also goes with independent variables. All of those words kind of get grouped together in that definition. The range is the set of output values. So we're going to write the set of output values for a relation. All right, so underline that output there because that's the only difference between these two definitions. It's the fact that domain's the input, whereas range is your outputs. Underneath of range, I'm going to do the same thing here. Range is also known as the y values, whether it's from ordered pairs or a table or a graph or whatever. And it's also sometimes referred to as the dependent variable. All right, if you need to pause that for anybody to finish writing, you're welcome to do so. I'm going to take a look at the practice problems. So if you look at the first practice problem, it says give the domain and the range for the relation shown below. And then you have a table. Even though the table does not come right out and list these are the x's and these are the y's, when a table is given to you a row on top of a row like this, the x's are always listed first and the y's are always listed second. So that's just something to keep in mind. Remember that we just got done saying that domain up here, that's your x values. So for domain, I want you to write x's, and for range, we just got done writing that that's the y values. So we're going to write y's next to domain. And you'll see me pretty much do that every time I see the word domain and every time I see the word range. For domain, I'm listing out all of the x's that I see up here. So all of these numbers, I have to list them out as part of the domain. You have to be really careful though. Sometimes these numbers are given to you in order in the table, sometimes they're not. When you list out the domain, please make sure that you put them in order and that you don't do any repetition. So for example, the smallest number that I see is 1900, so that gets written first. Then 1920, these ones happen to be in order, so then 1940, 1960, 1980, and 2000. And you always put them in those fancy little brackets to say like this is the beginning of the set and this is the end of the set. The set is everything on the inside there. The range is the list of those y values from the table. So that's going to be right here. All right, but again, you have to make sure that they get put in order from smallest to biggest, and you can't include any repetition. So if you look here, the smallest number in the y's is at 2, but there's another 2. I'm not going to write another 2 though. All right, so then I just move on, and I see the next biggest number is 3, and then 4, and then 15, and then the last number is 33 there. All right, so we're going to make a little note here. A couple things to keep in mind when you're asked to do this on your homework because you'll see very similar problems. So a couple things to keep in mind that when you make your list, make sure you put them in order. Put numbers in order. Also, besides just putting them in order, you don't include any repeats. So put numbers in order when you list them out and don't include any repeats. For example, I only listed out 1, 2 in my range, even though there were actually 2 listed. I did not repeat it. So that's really important. All right, guys, on the next page, you'll see example 2, which is a slightly different kind of example because it's not a table, it's actually a graph. So if you look here, we've got a picture of a graph, and it says give the domain and range for the relation shown below. The graphs can be a little bit tricky because you actually don't have numbers listed out. So what I'm going to do first with this one is make a list of ordered pairs. So for example, I'm first going to look at each of the points right here and start making a list of ordered pairs. So this first point right here, it is left 2 and up 2. So that would be the point -2, 2. And I'm going to keep on going. The next point right here is left 1 and up 1 on the graph. So this would be -1, 1. There's another point right in the center at the origin. So that point would be 0, 0. After that, this one is right 1 and down 1. So that would be 1, -1. The next point is right 2 and down 2. So that would be 2, -2. And the last point right here is right 3 and down 3, so that point would be 3 comma negative 3. So from here, you are going to pick out the domain and range. So one thing to keep in mind, just like I did on the last page, domain is your x's, range is your y's. So I want just the x's when I list out my domain in those fancy little brackets. Just the x's, guys, those are all the first numbers in those parentheses. The x's always come first when you list out points. You list these out in order, and you make sure that you don't include any repeats. So the smallest one is -2, then -1, 0, then 1, then 2, and then 3. Close it up. For the range, these are your y's. So my range, my y's, are sitting in that second spot of all of my parentheses. So my range then, smallest to biggest, so I would need the smallest one would be -3, comma, -2, then -1, 0, 1, and 2 would be my biggest one, and then I would stop. I did not have any repeats in that set, so there was nothing to worry about as far as that one. I did just have to make sure I went in order from smallest to biggest. Okay. Last example, and then you guys are free to work on your homework. Number 3 gives you a list of ordered pairs, just like I ended up writing them out for this problem. I just didn't have to look at a graph to get them, so this is actually easier. We're going to look at the domain first. Domain is your x's. Remember, range is your y's. So I'm looking at just the x's. 0, 1, 2, and 3. Remember when you list them out to put them in order. So 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. I did not have any repeats for that one. If I did, I would have to make sure that I didn't repeat them when I wrote out my list. And then for the range, I've got the y's. So that would be the 4, the 5, the 6, and the 7. So when I go to write that out, I would write 4, 5, 6, 7, close up your brackets. And that's all we do for domain and range, guys. So there's a lot more to this lesson than just domain and range.
Yeah, just a reminder.
You do not have to worry about this reminder.
Flu vaccines are being given today in the guidance office. So if you would like to have your flu vaccine for the season, please come down to the guidance office. There are forms in the mail room.
I'm going to try to talk over that. Okay, so there's a lot more to this lesson, but first we have to get good at identifying domain and range. So being able to look at a problem, whether it's a graph, whether it's a list of ordered pairs like this one, or whether it is given to you in table form, like that first practice problem that we did together. You need to be able to pick out where are the x's and where are the y's. You need to remember to put them in order, and you need to remember not to include any repeats like this one. I did not write 2 twice, even though it was listed twice in the table. When you list out domain and range, numbers go in order, no repeats. So there's lots of different ways to show that. Okay? All right, guys. Hopefully your notes are done. You do not have to worry about that part anymore. The rest of the time, you can look up here. Well, nope. That'd make me upside down. All right, so the rest of the time is spent for homework. I'll see you guys tomorrow.